From Hecate to Morgan Le Fay and Galadriel, and from Merlin to Harry Potter and Stephen Vincent Strange, let's talk about Sorcerers. Hello you funky people, Funky Monkey here, welcome to today's episode. How are you? How's life treating you? I for one, I'm very glad that the weekend is here, and I'm very grateful that you are joining me while I take you on this journey through the history of Sorcerers. It is the last fantasy class to cover before the new Dungeons & Dragons movie comes out. If you haven't watched my previous videos on the history that inspired most of our beloved fantasy classes, make sure you do so. I am sure you'll find them inspiring. Now, before we jump in our story, I want to talk about the miniature I will be making today. Yep, you heard me right, I will be making a miniature from scratch. I need something impressive for the next D&D sessions because my players are high level and they are about to dive in a mega dungeon, and I don't really have something suitable for every encounter. I will be spending time a little more talking about what I will be doing between the segments of history, so I hope you won't get bored and, on the contrary, you will enjoy it. Hello everyone, sorry for the interruption, editing Funky Monkey Sherban here. I just wanted to apologize for forgetting to turn on the camera for the last part of the miniature creation process, and as such the video will end pretty abruptly. And I also forgot to take beauty shots of the finished miniature once it was dry, as I just returned from vacation and immediately started painting the miniature, and I forgot to take beauty shots of it before it was finished. As such, this video will not have beauty shots of the miniature because I don't want to spoil the next video and the end result. So yeah, sorry, it happens, and I hope you still enjoy the creation process of the miniature. Now I'll let you get back to the video. Bye. By the way, this turned out to be more of a general episode in which I talk about different magic wielders and try to establish what sorcerers are. I really hope you enjoy it. Now, let's talk about what I will be doing. For the first time, I'm exercising my drawing skills by putting on paper the miniature I want to build. First time making a miniature. Heck, it's my first time using modeling paste. And to be honest, although I'm a man of many talents, drawing might not be one of them, at least not this kind of drawing. Let me draw archaeological contexts. Let me draw ceramics, items, easy. Maps? Of course, child's play. Stick figures? Are you kidding me? I majored in stick figures. But when it comes to this, well, you can see for yourself. But I'm getting the job done, so that's what matters. I also got out my fancy black sketchbook for this and spent at least half an hour finding my white pen. It will all be worth it. I drew my inspiration from one of my favorite games of all times, or at least that's what I like to believe. I wanna go for a combination between a sectoid from XCOM Enemy Unknown when you first reveal them, but with a tall lanky body, weirdly arched, constantly walking on all fours. I want to make its hind legs that of a feline, allowing it to leap on its target, while the front legs are inspired by the chrysalid from XCOM, with huge blades that finish in very sharp tips. I want the creature to be able to leap on its opponent, slash as it lands, and pierce them when they try to run away. I see it having a weird head, the sectoid head, large eyes, no mouth, and maybe some weird tendrils. I want to make the body segmented, with some vents and weird openings or ports that allow, I don't know, weapon mounts or something. I want the neck to appear as segmented, and I plan on painting it pitch black and making it weirdly glistening. It will have gears poking out and it will be pretty battered but still a formidable force. This hopefully will inspire terror in my players, because they are getting pretty cocky at this point. Yes, ladies of Naldalore, I'm talking about you. I know what you're thinking. These all seem very ambitious plans, Funky Monkey. Well, yeah, I'm a very ambitious creator. For a bit of context so you can get a better picture of what I'm going for, this is a biomechanical creature from long ago, from when the world was still young and the first civilizations reached their peak, taking on the old gods. basically from before the Sundering, the cataclysm of the world. It is weirdly alien, and the bones of the last person who perhaps had the vaguest idea of how it worked have long turned to dust, eons ago. I don't have a name for it just yet, but it was a construct that was specially built to take on very powerful individuals. The name will have to reflect that. If you have any ideas for a name for this creature, make sure you leave it in the comments below. You might inspire me. Now, let's get back to the story. With the plans laid out, let us go through the checklist. I don't have any coffee tonight because it's quite late in the evening, and if I have one more coffee, I will be able to recreate the classic Catherine Janeway meme, coffee, one more cup and I'll jump to warp. So no coffee for me, but instead I do have some very awesome fruit tea in my mousse cup. Oh, it was brought to my attention that people might not understand why I call this my mousse cup. Yeah, I actually can see that. So for you to better understand why I'm calling this my mousse cup, I have to hold it with my left hand. See, there's a mousse on my cup, thus my mousse cup. Now I'm left here pondering, is the mousse on this side so I can see the mousse while I pick up the cup? Or is it meant to be held in the left hand so I can see the mousse while I drink out of the cup? Is there such a thing as a right-handed or left-handed cup? To be honest, I would like to see the mousse while I drink out of my cup. But anyway, I'm digressing. This is my mousse cup. Now you know. I will have to make a habit out of picking the mousse cup with my left hand so you actually see the mousse. As for my assistants, they are around here and they are both running around and meowing. I'm sure you might be actually able to hear them during the video. So if you hear some weird noises, those are my assistants running around. And of course I do have, as always, something for the soul. How about you? Are you all comfy, cozy and with something tasty to drink on hand? Awesome, then I think it's time for a story. Throughout history, people from across the world have revered, envied, and feared those whom they believed wielded magic. It is something we all wish we could do. It is something we fantasize about, and we all believe we could use it for good. But if we are to look at what history teaches us and tells us about magic and how people were treated when they were believed to wield magic, the picture is quite different. In the end, fear and even envy gets the better of people and they turn to violence to stifle what they don't understand and or perceive as dangerous. Although we all know magic is not real. Illusions are real, tricks are real, but not magic, at least not in the fantasy way. No wonder that miracles and magic became very, very rare once cameras were invented. Mind you, for the most ancient of times, there were those who believed that magic was real. They believed in divination and soothsaying. And there were those who knew what was going on behind the curtain, or simply didn't believe in magic nor did they care about magic. The foremost providers of sorcerers and magic wielders in general throughout history have been religions, either by turning to magic for different purposes, accepting it, even embracing it, or vilifying people who were believed to be wielding magic. Now, if you know your magic and your history, you most likely spotted the fact that in the intro of this video, I listed characters who are not really sorcerers. Well, not all of them, not by the definition we get, for example, in Dungeons and Dragons. Technically speaking, Harry Potter and Galadriel are witches. Hecate is a goddess. Now, Merlin is a wizard/warlock. Morgan Le Fay and Doctor Strange are sorcerers in their own right, but in general, we also have mages that I did not mention, and don't even get me started on shamans and dervishes. But what is the difference? What makes each and every one of them special? Well, let's break it down and get to the root of it. By the way, before we dive even deeper, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to magic and magic wielders. So this is just a fraction of the whole story, while the rest, well, you know the drill. Another story for another time. To be honest, I think this is one of the most complex topics I've tackled thus far on this channel, and the rabbit hole goes so deep. But I'll try to stick to the highlights. Before we get in the weeds, I am curious. Do you know the difference between the many kinds of magic wielders? If you do, make sure you share what you know down in the comments, as I am sure I will be missing things. So, let's start with the difference. First, what is a witch? Etymologically speaking, the word comes from Old English, from witje, with its masculine version, warlock. We'll get to that in a second. The word itself is much older, with its roots in Proto-Indo-European and Proto-Germanic, but there are too many possible roots, so we won't be going through all of them. By the way, I will do an episode on the Indo-Europeans at some point, seeing how they keep popping up in our stories. Now, back to the witches. There isn't really a consistent definition of what a witch is, and depending on the age we are talking about and the area we are talking about, we can see different interpretations. In the 15th century, the Latin word maleficus was used for witches, and they carried out maleficium or maleficium, meaning harmful acts of sorcery against others. By the way, in the Middle Ages, witches were persecuted for their moral corruption and failings that led them to carrying out maleficium, not necessarily for their acts themselves. And once the idea of a pact with devils or demons for said powers came into play, well, we get the Middle Ages witch hunts. The word witch is usually used for women, but men could also be called witches, like in Harry Potter. Only more recently have other words been used to describe male practitioners of witchcraft, and those words are either wizard or warlock, although we will see that they are completely different. In Europe, it is believed that witches need physical tools to perform their magic, such as material components in Dungeons & Dragons, while sorcerers can channel their inner power. But in other places of the world, such as in Africa, it is exactly the opposite, and witches can enact maleficium with their thoughts alone, even without realizing it, like Harry Potter in the first movie when he and his adoptive family were at the zoo. According to legend, there are so many ways for witches to cast spells, from using herbs and amulets to reciting incantations or through runes. They can scry using a mirror, a sword, or other reflective surfaces, like Galadriel did when she invited Frodo to gaze in the water basin under the light of Erandil. In legend, sorcery powers were usually reserved for individuals who either weren't human or not fully human, like Galadriel, who was an elf, or for wicked fairies or gods. Some of the most famous witches in history, at least in ancient history, are Medea, Circe, and the Witch of Endor. While in medieval times we have Morgan Le Fay, and we cannot omit her, and in modern times we have Galadriel, Rennie Weatherwax, Nanny Og, and Magrat Garlek. And I'm sure there are so many more, but these are the ones I am more familiar with. By the way, are you familiar with any of the names I just mentioned, or any other famous witch from history? If you are, leave a comment down below, as I'm curious how far the names of these characters reached across the world. With the witches explained, more or less, what is a hag? Thankfully, this is a little bit simpler. Etymologically speaking, hag derives from the Old English haga, or hegtese, borrowed from Old Norse, meaning portion of woodland marked off for cutting, while hegtese meant woman of prophetic or oracular powers. In Old Norse, we also have tunritha, meaning hedge rider, a word used for witches and ghosts alike. Eventually, in Old English, it ended up meaning repulsive old woman, a definition that still holds today. It is one of the words for witches that has no masculine form, and most likely meant soothsayer or diviner in the northern pagan parts of Europe. In Old Norse, hegtese was an alternative word that referred to a Norn. any of the three weird sisters that were basically the fates that appear in mythology, especially here in Europe. And if you're wondering why Hedge Rider, well, it's very simple. The hedge represented the boundary between the civilized and the uncivilized, the wild world outside. Eventually the word evolved to mean the local healer and root collector or herbalist. They would travel from village to village offering their skills and services, sleeping under the open sky. By the same principle, we also get hedge priest and hedge wizard. It does have a negative or demeaning connotation. In more recent times, we get the hag as we know and love, the creepy old woman who lives in a swamp or in a house on a chicken leg, lures children in her gingerbread house, and tells the fate of those who visit her in exchange for high prices. The best known hag is of course Baba Yaga. I will do a video on hags at one point, but again, you already know the drill, that's another story for another time. Okay, with witches and hags explained, I think it is time we talk about the miniature. But before we do so, first, if you found any value in the video thus far, don't be shy, hit that like button. This shows me that you found some inspiration. Make sure you subscribe and join our growing funky community, and make sure the notifications are on so you don't miss any of my next videos. And second, because my assistants are pretty much too busy being cute as of late and don't pop in the frame as often as I would like to and as often as you would like to, make sure you check out TW Creative - Cats, a channel with shorts that have nothing to do with history, but everything to do with cat adventures. Now, let's talk about the witchcraft I am doing with the modeling paste before we return to our story. For the frame of the miniature, I went with twisted electric wires with the outer sheath and all insulation removed. They are quite delicate and I really don't like them. They break off quite easily and they become invisible once I do so. But I had nothing else on hand. Next time I will go with some bouquet wire or gardening wire. I secured them in the general position with some milliput, and initially the miniature had the support of the neck in place, but I dropped it of course and I lost it. But I know what I'm going for, so I'm not that worried. Of course the legs could have been longer, of course there were some things I would have changed, but I will make it work. Once I settled on the general shape, I started adding the modeling paste to the frame, and the miniature is starting to take shape. I really would have liked the hind legs a little longer, I can't stress this enough. But I will compensate with the forelegs, giving the miniature the height and the posture I'm looking for. It's not that bad working with this paste, I'm not used to it, and it's a little hard somehow to completely envelop the frame, but I'm getting the hang of it, so it's all good. As you can see, I'm using baking parchment so the miniature doesn't stick to the table, and I'm keeping the sketch I made earlier on hand just to make sure I'm following it. I started with the hind legs because once they are in place they will add the stability I need for the miniature, and I will also better see where I need to add more weight. To no one's surprise though, the plans are already starting to change a little, and I'm giving the miniature neural spines akin to that of a Spinosaurus. I don't know how to better explain this except calling it a backblade or something, with some indents that represent ports. I wanted this fin to be really sharp, but don't ask why. It will also have side fins for some reason, with indents, and I won't add any more material to the underside of the miniature though, going for that weird lanky look. I don't know, everything is already starting to derail a little bit, but onward we go. Now back to the story. Let's continue on our journey. What is a warlock? Etymologically speaking, the word derives from the Old English werloka, and it means the breaker of oaths or the deceiver, usually used to describe the devil. In Middle Ages Scotland, it was used to describe those who struck a deal with the devil in exchange for magical powers. Thus, we get the warlock class in Dungeons & Dragons and other RPGs, those who have sold a part of their souls in exchange for power. They were accused, in essence, of breaking their oaths to Christianity and Jesus himself. A warlock is a male practitioner of magic, and it can be used, the word can be used to describe a male witch. So it's quite simple. Oh, by the way, just as a teaser, Merlin was believed to have been born out of a human mother and a devil father, thus inheriting his father's powers. He was in essence a tiefling with an infernal lineage, sorcerer because he inherited his father's powers, but a warlock because he was the result of an infernal pact, a pact that carried over from his mother somehow. So yeah, it's all very entangled, so I will have to do a video on Merlin and his origins, but you know, come on, say it with me. That's another story for another time. During the witch trials in the Middle Ages, again especially in Scotland, besides women who were executed as being witches, there were also men executed for being warlocks, or at least people believing they were warlocks. As I mentioned, one of the most famous magic users to be considered a warlock was Merlin, but only in more recent times. Okay, now let's move on and talk about what a mage is. When it comes to mages, they have a very long history and are among the most extensively mentioned magic practitioners in ancient literature and across time. Etymologically, the word comes from the Latin magus, that comes from Greek, that comes from the Old Persian margus. Then the word can be traced even further back to Proto-Indo-European roots, mag or mag, meaning to be able. Hang on, we're not done yet. From Persian, the word infiltrated other languages besides Greek and later Latin. And thus we have magos in Hebrew, we have amgusha in Aramaic, meaning magician, we have Magdim in Chaldean, meaning wisdom or philosophy, and later in Syrian we have Magusai, meaning magician and soothsayers. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, it's simple. You now know where the word comes from, what its roots mean, and how it was perceived in different cultures, ranging from being able to something, to wisdom and philosophy, to soothsaying and magicians. This also indicates the attitude people had towards those whom they believed wielded magic. And on top of all of that, in Old Sintic, we have mag, which can be translated to mage or shaman. I told you the rabbit hole was very deep. In the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, when the word made its way in classic Greek, it was used with a negative connotation when referring to weird or even dangerous rituals that were outside the norm of the Greek religion. After it made its way into Latin in later centuries, it ended up in early Christian theology and was associated with demons, making it, by definition, an enemy of the Christian religion. And thus, mages are enemies of Christians, by definition. And now you know. Now, perhaps you're wondering, when do wizards come into picture? Well, the answer is right now. What is a wizard? Etymologically speaking, the word comes from the Middle Ages, around the 16th century, when it became a distinct word derived from wis, meaning wise. The earlier meanings of the word wizard or wis were sage or philosopher, because at a certain time in history, the distinction between magic and philosophy was pretty blurred, but it was because philosophy itself meant something a little bit different than what we understand it to be today. So starting with the 16th century, the word became distinct. In medieval times, they were considered old wise men who acted as mentors and wielded magical powers. They of course overlap with everything I've mentioned before. They were warlocks, sorcerers, witches, soothsayers, wielders of arcane forces, etc., etc., and by the gods, etc. The best examples of wizards are Merlin, although he's / warlock, Dumbledore, Gandalf, Saruman, and Rincewind. The difference is simple when compared to mages, the fact that they were very well versed in many subjects, filling the role of mentors and advisors, thus this being reflected in their old age put them in a better light, somehow indicating that they had control over their powers and they were using these powers for good. This gave birth to the idea that wizards learned and honed their skills through study, by being apprentices to other wizards or attending academies such as Hogwarts or the Unseen University of Ankh-Morpork. They are sometimes depicted as being born with some magical powers that they later harness and learn to control. But this is actually pretty vague, as they are mentioned to also gain their powers and knowledge through studying alone. This also reflects on the belief some people had in the Middle Ages regarding knowledge and the attitude they had towards those who were very well versed in many subjects. Perhaps it was a belief more or less encouraged by society, that the more you know, the closer you got to magic. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but imagine this. Imagine you were an astronomer and you calculated the movement of the celestial bodies, being able to predict an eclipse, let's say. Through the simple fact you knew how to predict this and how to calculate this, you were regarded as being a wizard. Or imagine finding water in arid places because you knew what signs to look for. Or imagine being able to identify the direction you wanted to go in by simply looking at the way moss grew on trees, let's say. Or you managed to perform some medical miracle because you were training to be a physician. All of this would have been regarded as close to magic as one can get, depending on the audience, of course. Even to this day, we are impressed by other people's skills. Even to this day, we use the word wizard to describe someone very, very talented and proficient at something, like a whiz kid or a computer whiz. But this is not to say that people in Middle Ages or Antiquity were stupid. Let me stress this as much as I can. People were not stupid. It is just that their attitude towards those who were very well read was something akin to being in awe. Something we kinda lost in modern times. Nowadays, most people would rather listen to insane conspiracy theories than look to those who dedicate their whole lives to the study of a particular subject and become masters or wizards at it. But I won't go on that rant, not today. Now, if we go with a modern depiction, wizards need to attend school, thus in the end becoming more powerful than innate magic wielders. If you play Dungeons & Dragons, wizards have access to the largest and longest spell list in the game. And now, for the pièce de résistance. What is a sorcerer? The topic of today's video. Etymologically speaking, the word comes from the medieval Latin sortiarius, or teller of fortunes by lot, and this came from the ancient Latin sors, meaning lot or fate or fortune. As we saw, it is quite complicated to explain what a sorcerer or a sorceress are, separate of other practitioners of magic, as they all overlap and there is no firm definition. Sorcerers are magic practitioners who, depending on the part of the world they are encountered in, can use physical components or don't need to use any physical components when casting their spells. They learn their craft from other people who have already been initiated in the arts of magic, as opposed to witches who can use innate magic, or depending on the place in the world, they actually use magic only instinctually, and almost always they use their powers to hurt others. They are also fortune tellers, and this is what the word meant up to the 14th century. Teller of fortunes by lot. Starting with the 15th century though, the meaning of the word changed to mean conjurer of evil spirits. Now that we know the difference between some of the main magic wielders, at least at surface level, I want to tell you the stories of two pretty famous mythological sorcerers and soothsayers. But before we do so, let's take a look at how the miniature is coming along and be amazed. There is an old saying in Romanian that I will try and translate as it fits the situation perfectly. It goes something along the lines of, the plans you make at home do not match those at the market. I don't know an equivalent in English actually, but I hope you get the gist. My friends, take a good hard look at this miniature and compare it with what it looked like earlier. I am sure we can all agree the end result does not match the expectation. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not what I started with in mind. The legs, both hind legs and forelegs, were too short, and in combination with the height and the weight of the paste, this resulted in the miniature being more stable without an arched back. I tried to lengthen the forelegs with the use of coffee stirrers, but the miniature was too front heavy and the paste did not have a good enough grip on the stirrers nor on the wires, so the stirrers poked through. Perhaps I should have left it like that. I didn't have enough patience to wait for the paste to harden a little because I was running the risk of everything hardening and not being able to finish in time. So I changed the orientation of the forelegs, made them resemble three-edged blades, more or less, and the mini is now comfortably resting on the table. Although one of the hind legs is a little bit in the air, I think it's an easy fix, so I'm not that worried. It has a lower height than what I wanted, but it's still an impressive construct to be honest, and the blades I envisioned as its forelegs have changed dramatically. At least I am able to make indents to mark the ports. What I don't like are the cracks in the paste. I'm really trying to use a little bit of water and smooth everything together, but either I'm not doing it right or it doesn't work properly. More likely, I don't know what I'm doing, so let's be honest there. Anyway, it's looking interesting, it could have looked better, but I hope you agree it could have looked much worse. Back to the story. Okay, we will finish talking about how complex this topic is by listing some of the practices that fall under the magic umbrella, so you get a clearer picture as to why I bored the living shit out of you with different etymologies, the differences between witches and hags and wizards and mages. Why was this episode a general one? So, under the great umbrella of magic practices, we have, among many others, the following. Witchcraft, practiced by witches. Incantations, practiced by witches, hags and sorcerers. Divinations, practiced by witches, hags, mages, sorcerers, wizards, basically everyone. Necromancy. This is a special kind of magical practice that will get its own video as it is a class in many RPGs. Astrology. Not everybody did this, most were soothsayers and mages. Oh, and a famous astrologist was Nostradamus. Conjuring. Wizards, witches, warlocks and mages. Alchemy. This is the search for means of transforming lead into gold and the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. The most prominent figure in this field was Nicolas Flamel from Harry Potter. Chloromancy. Surprising, this practice is mentioned in the Bible 47 times, including in the Old Testament and the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. So, as you can see, this was actually a way of interpreting the will of the gods, or the Hebrew God in this case. And it started being frowned upon more recently, from the 15th century onward. Before then, it was a legit practice to understand what the gods, or the one god, wanted from his followers. Now, this one is a little... actually, it's quite interesting. Astragalomancy. Rolling the dice to determine the will of a god. What Fresh Cut Grass or FCG in Critical Role does, as of late, to determine the will of the Changebringer. Mysticism. Witches, mages, soothsayers, etc. Everybody was doing mysticism. Shamanism. Shamans. They will get their own video. Voodoo. Witch doctors and witches, warlocks, etc. And from the European perspective, with the European invasion of other corners of the world, any other religion encountered outside of Christianity was considered to be magic. Moreover, there are black, white and grey magics, each with its subdivisions, with its own rites, practices and famous wielders. Although I can't say any famous grey magic practitioners comes to mind. If you have an example or two, I would be grateful if you would leave them in the comments below. But as a black magic practitioner, we have Voldemort from Harry Potter. I was just about to say Lord of the Rings. While a white magic practitioner, we have in Dumbledore. And because things were too simple thus far, we also have high magic and low magic. High magic is believed to be practiced by intellectual elites, wizards and alchemists, while low magic is considered to be wielded by commoners, hags, witches and the such. With all of that being said and done, I cannot let you go without giving you the two examples I have promised earlier, of two famous magic wielders from mythology. We will talk about Circe and Sibylla. Let's start with Circe. In Greek mythology, she was a minor deity, the daughter of the Titan Helios, a sun god, and the Oceanid nymph Perse. Oceanid means she was the daughter of the ocean titan Oceanus and Tethys. She held a vast knowledge of herbs and potions and wielded a wand and a staff, transforming her enemies into animals. I mean, this is the textbook mage from World of Warcraft using polymorph, using a wand and a staff, best in slot even, going for the herbalism and alchemy professions. Textbook mage from World of Warcraft. She's also described as a capricious individual. She appears in the Odyssey and turns Odysseus's men into swines when they visit her isle. I never knew how to pronounce this name. I'm gonna leave it down below. You figure it out. She turned them into swines while they visit her isle, while they were journeying back from their Trojan War. Odysseus managed to convince her to turn them back into humans, and in return, he spends a year with her having multiple sons. Well, at least they had fun. Another story of her is when she turned an Italian king, Picus, into a woodpecker because he resisted her advances. And in another story, she falls in love with a minor Greek prophetic sea deity, Glaucus. He is in love with another nymph, Scylla, refusing Circe. As an act of vengeance, she uses her knowledge of potions and poisons and fouls the river in which Scylla regularly bathes, turning her into a hideous monster. In medieval times, Circe was used to warn against sorcery and sexually free women, being depicted as a predatory woman. Ooh, sexually free women, the classic medieval nightmare. What the hell am I saying? This mentality is still present in our society to this day. Whoop-de-doo, we're afraid of sexually free women. Her revenge on Picus for rejecting her and on Scylla for being desired by Glaucus establishes her as an example of violent and toxic jealousy. This I can understand, this I can agree with, but not being an example of why you should steer clear of sexually free women. Anyway. There are two interesting legends as to how she arrived to the Isle of this. First is that she rode Helios's chariot there. The other is that she was taken there by dragons. Either of these legends can make their way easily in any fantasy world with no issue, and actually be a little bit on the boring side. Especially the variant where she flies in on a fiery chariot that belongs to the sun god. I mean, who doesn't do that in most Dungeons and Dragons campaign? Anyway, her sister was Pasiphae, mother of the Minotaur, and one of her brothers was Aetes, keeper of the Golden Fleece from the legend of Jason. So, as you can see, she was part of a very prominent family all around. Now, let's talk about Sibylla. She was an ancient Greek prophetess with a prominent role in Greek mythology. She was represented as a very old woman who would make predictions while in an ecstatic frenzy, most likely induced by drugs. She would hand down prophecies in writing, all in Greek hexameters, a kind of ancient Greek poetry. Initially, Sibylla or Sibyl was a name used for women prophetesses. But around the late 5th, early 4th century BCE, the legends spoke of only one individual by that name. Basically, they were melded into one individual. Interestingly enough, the Greeks didn't really like that idea, so by the end of the 4th century BCE, the number of Sibyllas, or Sibyls, multiplied again, referring to a group of women who would reside close to oracles, were associated with the god Apollo, and Sibyl became only a title. They had names and they were identified by their names, but with the Sibyl title in front of it. What is really cool about the Sibyl, at least in my opinion, is a story that remained in Roman legends. According to this legend, during the reign of the last king of Rome, yes, Rome had 7 kings. I will make a video about this, I already promised this, but it's another story for another time. There's so many things to talk about in history. I will get to the 7 kings of Rome, as it's quite interesting. But anyway, during the reign of Tarquinius Superbus, the last king, in the 6th century BCE, the king was offered 9 books, 9 books that contained the prophecies of the Cumean Sibyl, the Sibyl who lived in Cumania? This area. He refuses her price and so she burns 6 of the books, never to be read by the eyes of mortals. She then offered the remaining 3 books at the original price she asked for, and the king accepted. The books of prophecies were then kept in the vaults of the Temple of Jupiter in Rome and were consulted only in the most extreme of emergencies. The books were unfortunately lost in the fire of 83 BC that ravaged a good chunk of Rome. At the same time, a Judean or Babylonian Sibyl was credited with writing the Judeo-Christian Sibylline oracles, of which 14 books actually survived. They were considered by Christians to be prophetic authorities. You can see to this day Sibyls on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican and encounter them in the medieval hymn Dies Irae, in which the Sibyl is the equal of David when it comes to prophecies and in her oracle powers. To be honest, I love the idea of having books filled with prophecies somewhere in my world, so I included them in my fantasy world. And I love the story about Tarquinius Superbus and the Sibyl and how she forced the king's hand. From what I remember, but don't quote me on this because it's been quite a long time since I read this information, but from what I remember, the books were consulted only a handful of times, one of which was when Hannibal was at Rome's gates. So, the most extreme of emergencies. Now, let's take one more look at the miniature, see how it's coming along, gawk in awe before we end this video. Do you remember what I said at the start of the video? What my inspiration was? What my vision was? What my plans, hopes and dreams were? Well, I started out with a clear picture in my head. I wanted to go for something inspired by XCOM. I wanted to go for a combination between a sectoid with the forearms of a chrysalid and the hind legs of a feline, an arched back and weapon ports, blades for legs and wheeled tendrils. I wanted to go for XCOM and got Phoenix Point, thus ending with a lobster of sorts. Just like on Steam when I bought Phoenix Point. We can be honest here, it's a damn lobster. A high-level, biomechanical, pre-calamity lobster. With 3 edged blades instead of claws, and weird hind legs that look like it's walking on its tail. Weird indents on its back and tendrils on its face, but Still something Gordon Ramsay could easily teach you how to properly portion and poach in butter, then plate with some fresh parsley. But as you saw, the miniature did go through multiple phases until it settled under its own weight in the lobster shape. You know, ancient sculptures believed that the shape is already inside the block of stone, marble, clay, even metal, and their sole job was to bring forth that shape. Let the material speak and just bring the shape forth. I will go with this explanation too. This chunk of modeling paste was always a weird lobster, I just brought it forth. And you were along for the ride, witnessing my failure and victory. Failure because I did not get the mini I set out to make, but victory because I made my first miniature from scratch. And I hope this inspires you to make your own lobster. I'm pretty happy with the results, to be honest, although it's a bittersweet taste. In the end, I made it myself, learned a lot, understood how to work with the clay, and next time I will be more proficient in it. Oh, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I also lost part of the recording, so I will tell you what the next steps are. I have some small metal gears that I will cut in half using a pair of pliers. I will then stick half gears on the back of the miniature and on its legs, both hind and forelegs. This will enhance the alien look lobsters innately have. And there are no beauty shots, unfortunately, so make sure you tune in next time to see the end result. If you're curious, of course. Now let's wrap things up. And with that, I would like to thank you for the privilege of your time, and I truly hope you found some inspiration and learned something new today. I can't wait to see you all funky people here next time on Funky Monkey MP, the place where you get your dose of mini painting, history, world building and trivia. Make sure you like, subscribe and share if you enjoyed this video. Remember, always be curious, take inspiration from the past and never stop world building and creating awesome things, whatever those are. Your mind and imagination are amazing. Oh, and being well versed in many a field or mastering even one is magical even to this day, regardless of what others might say. Have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. Cheers.